Hi, I'm Maya, and today I want to talk about To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I heard about this book in a podcast about Virginia Woolf that I was listening to because I'd read Mrs. Dalloway and some of her other short stories and essays, and I just really wanted to know what else she had written so that I could read it. And the podcast mentioned that the structure of this book is like a dumbbell, and that was really fascinating to me. So it's like this. This is part one, this is part two, this is part three. So big, small, big. I just had never heard of a book structured like that before, so I was really excited to read it, and it did not disappoint. There's so much that I love about this book. I think what I love most is how it just is so good at describing human nature, and so many of the like small little things that happen are things that I've experienced in life or I've noticed in other people. And I just think Virginia Woolf is absolutely brilliant and I love her. So just disclaimer, this video is going to be full of spoilers, so if you don't want to know what happens in the book, don't watch it. I'm going to be talking about everything, like in all parts of the book. Yeah, just don't watch it if you don't want spoilers, but if you don't mind, keep watching. And actually, I don't think spoilers ruin this book, because the podcast I was listening to had a really big spoiler in it, but it didn't ruin the book for me. So the book is about a young boy named James Ramsey and his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, and he asks them if he can go to the lighthouse. They're in their vacation home in Scotland, and yeah, it's basically like a beach house, and the little boy, James, wants to go to the lighthouse, and his mom says yes, but his dad says no, and so they don't end up going, and it really upsets him. And then time passes, and then he's older in the last part of the book, and he finally gets to go to the lighthouse with his dad and his sister, at which point his mom has actually passed away. So I love that it's such a small, simple plot, because I think it shows that in life, it's the small things that become so significant to us. It's not always the big, momentous, crazy occasions that stick with us and change us and form us. Most of the time, it's just the small things. So the book does mention World War I, but it's not about World War I. So like all of these big, colossal events are happening around the little story at the heart of it. The story is very small scale, even though it talks about bigger things. Mostly though, it's just about family and family dynamics, and that's something that I love reading about in all the books that I read, even like YA stuff. I love Cassandra Clare because she talks so much about family relationships, sibling relationships, parent and children relationships. Virginia Woolf does an amazing job of describing that. I've also read The Waves by Virginia Woolf. After I read To the Lighthouse, I read The Waves. And I love The Waves, but I think this one is my favorite of hers that I've read. It's also very cinematic. There's this character named Lily who really brings a lot of soul to the book, and she's a friend that stays with them, and she's an artist or an aspiring artist, but there's this other guy staying there who's like a philosophy student, I think, and he tells her that women can't be good artists or good writers or good at anything, and she really takes that to heart and it hurts her. But the whole time she's trying to paint this portrait of Mrs. Ramsey and James, and Mrs. Ramsey and James are inside the house in front of a window, and then outside the window, out in the yard, is Lily with her easel, and she's painting them. And so it's kind of like shot reverse shot, because we'll have scenes where we're from the point of view of James and Mrs. Ramsey inside the house, and we're looking out, seeing Lily outside the window. But then we switch and we're from Lily's perspective and we're looking into the house at James and Mrs. Ramsey. So it's very cinematic. I can totally picture it, the camera work. I think that just shows how imaginative Virginia Woolf is and just how intuitive she is. Another like shot reverse shot type thing, or just changing the perspectives, like zooming in and out, is at the end, Lily is in the yard again, reminiscing about Mrs. Ramsey, missing her because, she died, and James and his sister Cam and their dad, Mr. Ramsey, are on a boat sailing towards the lighthouse. And so again, that perspective switch, we were in the boat with James and Cam and Mr. Ramsey sailing towards the lighthouse. Then all of a sudden we're with Lily at the house looking at the boat sailing away. So it just like zooming out, and then we zoom back in, we go back to their perspective. So It's just a joy to read. It's just so cinematic and so satisfying and interesting because it's changing all the time. Yeah, so just very cool. The main conflict in this story is the tension between James and his father, Mr. Ramsey. And I think it's something that all children feel, just this kind of like resentment towards their parent for telling them what to do, just being a downer, being controlling. Even if you have the kindest, nicest parents in the world, I think it's just human nature for kids to resent their parents a little bit. And so that's really explored in this book. But also, it's funny because she really just dives into the human brain and brain of a child. I remember being a child and having my rules about, oh, I'm not gonna smile at my parents today because I'm mad at them. But then you become lenient, right? And you let your guard down and they do something nice for you and you're like, oh, all's forgiven. But then you start getting mad at yourself for letting your guard down. You think, oh, I'm still supposed to be mad at them. But then also they'll do something that you really admire and you're like, oh, I want to be like them when I'm older. Also, something that she explores a lot is they notice how other people view their parents, and they see that other people admire Mr. Ramsey and think that he's intelligent. He's a philosophy professor. And yeah, just seeing all that admiration aimed toward a parent figure by outsiders, it's frustrating because you live with them and you know what they're really like when they're not performing for other people. And you're just mad at them for not showing the world what they're really like, and you're frustrated that the world has a view of them that isn't completely correct. The alliance between siblings is a big one. I remember with my brothers being mad at our parents, and then one of my brothers would all of a sudden be chummy with one of our parents, and I'd be like, what the heck? We agreed that we would not, I mean, not officially agreed, right? But we would just subconsciously agreed that we would not converse with our parents that day. But then you see a sibling doing it and you feel betrayed, right? You feel like that trust has been broken between you and your sibling. And that's something that is mentioned in this book between Cam and James, because they are both mad at their dad, but then Cam starts getting more lenient and James is like, no, you gotta stay strong, you gotta stay mad at him. They're little things, but they're big things. And the alliance between children against parents is also found. There's also an alliance between parents against children, and that makes me think of the movie Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I don't remember which one it is, but in one of the movies, the dad is talking to the mom and he's mad at the mom that she is being lenient with the kids, and he's like, we're supposed to be a team against them. And I just think that's so funny and so true, and I think that's something that Virginia Woolf explores a lot in this book. One thing I love about this book is that it's so descriptive, but not to the point of boredom. Like, I'm not sitting there going, okay, why are we still talking about this? But it's a good amount of details that really help immerse me in the story and make me feel like I'm really there. Especially this description of the children's bedroom. There's like a pig skull on the wall. James is scared of it, so Mrs. Ramsey covers it with a scarf and then comforts them. And so it's just like little features around the room that help you really visualize it as you're reading. And the house itself that they're staying in Scotland is like a character in and of itself. It's fallen into a bit of disarray just because it's so old and they've been going there for so long that like there's sand tracked in everywhere, and Mrs. Ramsey has a rule that the windows stay open but the doors stay closed, but people don't listen to that and they leave everything open and stuff flies in, debris and stuff. So it's a little worn down, it's a little old. In the middle part, the skinny part of the dumbbell, when the housekeeper comes in to clean up the house, she's noticing how everything is a little bit old, like the wallpaper's peeling and the floor is a little bit warped from water getting tracked in. And I think that's really brilliant to have the housekeeper be there exploring the house, examining it, fixing it, because that allows us to realize that things have changed without Virginia Woolf just saying, oh, like just spitting it out. It's more like we have to infer it, which is more fun, I think. In the skinny part, in the time passes part, is when we find out that significant events have happened, like deaths. Like there have been multiple deaths in the family, but they're not just like bullet points and they're not like in bright red shiny letters. Like they're just kind of woven in as the housekeeper is cleaning, as we learn other things, which I think is very creative. I think it's also demonstrative of how life just happens. Life just goes on, and it's not always this big fanfare, this big fuss. Sometimes things just happen, deaths just happen, and it's just woven into the housekeeper cleaning up the house. So back to Lily. Love Lily. She's one of my favorite characters in literature ever, just because she's so relatable in her insecurities and in her admiration of Mrs. Ramsay. I think a lot of people have someone that they really look up to, really admire. Lily is very much in love with Mrs. Ramsay. She just wants to be like adopted by her. She wants to be part of this family so badly. So in a way, Lily is kind of an unreliable narrator because she's so in love with Mrs. Ramsay that she can't see her faults, and she always takes Mrs. Ramsay's side when there's a disagreement with Mrs. Ramsay and Mr. Ramsay. And so the reader is siding with Mrs. Ramsay as well, but then you have to stop and think, wait, Lily has blinders on when it comes to Mrs. Ramsay, so maybe Mr. Ramsay is also right in some regard. I like how Lily is used as a vehicle to explore sexism. I mentioned before Tansley, I think that's how you say it, the guy that is the philosophy student that tells Lily that women can't paint or write or do anything. It's like, well, what have you contributed? You're just a philosophy student who just regurgitates what other great people have said. You haven't come up with anything new on your own. So I think Lily is just a really interesting character that helps us explore a lot of different things. It's interesting that Lily is an outsider to the family. She's not blood related, but she also knows the family better than anybody, and she probably knows family members better than they know each other because she observes them so much and she's just constantly watching them and taking notes. It's interesting because Mr. and Mrs. Ramsay are both multifaceted and fascinating and just feel very, very real. And their fights are subtle until there's a big outburst, and then someone gets offended and then holds the grudge for a very long time until the offender does something charming, and then all is forgiven and they move on. And then it repeats again and they never progress, and it's just the same thing over and over and over again. So I wanted to talk about the parents a little bit more in depth. So Mrs. Ramsay is a really good multitasker. She has 8 kids and she handles them all, and she runs her house. She has to soothe tempers and, pet egos, and there's so much she has to do psychologically. Maybe not physically because her servants are taking care of all that, right? Like making the food and everything. But she is taking care of them emotionally and mentally. She does her rounds and make sure everybody's okay. I think it's important to remember that she does those things because it's easy to just dismiss her as a pretty face because she's described over and over again how beautiful she is. And I think, it's tempting to just think that's all there is to her. She's just this shallow, pretty shell. But there's a lot going on and a lot that she's working through inside. So Mr. Ramsay is very stuck up, very frustrating, a very annoying character to have to read because he's so dismissive of other people, and he tells James he can't go to the lighthouse because the weather's bad, and he says it so harshly when he knows that James really wants to go, and he just doesn't think about other people's feelings, and he's just very self-centered and thinks that he's very intelligent, which he is, but it's just annoying that he is aware of how smart he is. Half the time when I was reading, I just wanted to throw something at him or yell at him. But then there were other moments where he'd become really anxious, and he would just go in these spirals when he was having these mental blocks. And I was like, oh, he's very sympathetic. When he was in these spirals or these blocks, he just couldn't think of the next thing that he wanted to think of. So as a philosopher, he lays out these problems for himself that he tries to solve, but sometimes he can't. And like I said earlier about unreliable narrators and point of view, obviously our view of Mr. Ramsay is going to be a bit tainted because we're seeing him through the eyes of his wife and his children who are just getting annoyed with him and feeling unloved by him. But we don't really know his intent. What Mr. Ramsay makes me think of is how I have villainized people in my life that I probably shouldn't have. But yeah, back to the natural biases. The children are naturally biased against their father because he's the authority figure, and the wife feels very hurt by him. But are these reliable narrations, and can we trust them? Should we be more forgiving of Mr. Ramsay? But right as this happens, right as I'm starting to sympathize with Mr. Ramsay, he goes and does something else that just makes me livid with him. And I'm like, well, forget it. Maybe I was right. Maybe he is a jerk. Like, one of his big lines that he repeats over and over again is, someone has blundered. I think that just shows how much of a perfectionist he is. Like, he wants things to run so smoothly, but he can't make them. Well, it was funny, right? When I was reading this book, I was reading it during Thanksgiving break. We watched Meet Me in St. Louis, which I'd never seen before. And the dad in that movie reminded me a lot of Mr. Ramsay, just very egotistical and not caring about what his family was going through. And just going according to his whims, and everything hinged around him. Everything depends on the father's moves, like moods. The family can't do anything if the father is in a bad mood. And the wives have to make them feel better about themselves in both Meet Me in St. Louis and in this book and in other movies and books. It's just frustrating that women have to show deference to their husband and put their wants aside. Just in conclusion, I think the reason why I love this book so much is because I've seen the subtle fights, I've seen the shifting power dynamics between siblings and parents. I've seen the influence of very beautiful or very intelligent people and how their moral lapses are easily forgiven and they get free passes. I've also seen the chaos and the kinetic force that comes with a large family. I just think Woolf is brilliant, and there's so much goodness packed into this book, and I would really encourage you to read it if you haven't read it. I just wanted to read a few lines that I've highlighted. Her simplicity fathomed what clever people falsified. He smiled the most exquisite smile, veiled by memory, tinged by dreams. Thank you for watching, and I hope you give this book a read.